The airport terminal buzzed with cold fluorescent light, and Pearl's wrists trembled as two immigration officers gripped her arms and pulled her toward the gate. She did not scream. She did not fight. She only pressed one hand flat against her stomach, low and quiet, where no one could see it beneath her coat. Nobody noticed. Not the officers dragging her forward, not the businessmen glancing up from their phones, and not her husband, Kang Do-hyun, who stood 12 feet away in a charcoal suit, his face carved from stone, Yoon Seo-rin's manicured hand resting on his forearm like she owned it. Pearl turned once. Just once. She searched his eyes for something. Regret, hesitation, anything. She found nothing. "Board the flight," Do-hyun said. His voice did not shake. It did not rise. It simply ended the conversation, the marriage, the life they had built in 11 months of stolen mornings and whispered promises. Pearl's lips moved, so soft that only the wind carried it. "Our baby will never know you." The gate doors slid shut behind her like the closing of a coffin lid. Do-hyun did not watch her disappear. He turned and walked toward the black car waiting outside, Seo-rin's heels clicking beside him in perfect rhythm. And somewhere behind those doors, a woman he once called his wife carried a secret that would take 4 years to surface. 4 years later, the guards at the gates of the Kang family headquarters were the first to see her. A little girl, no older than 4, stood at the base of the marble steps. Her skin was a deep, warm brown, her hair braided into 2 neat plaits, and in her small fist she clutched a single photograph, its edges soft from being touched too many times. She did not cry. She did not run. She simply looked up at the enormous glass doors and walked through them like she had been there before. The lobby went still. Security radios crackled. A woman near the reception desk gasped and reached for the child, but the girl slipped past her fingers and kept walking, her small shoes echoing against the polished floor, until she stood directly in front of the man stepping out of the private elevator. Kang Do-hyun. He stopped mid-stride. His bodyguards tensed, hands moving toward their jackets, forming a loose wall around him out of instinct. The girl looked up at him, unblinking, and said the word that would break the last 4 years of silence wide open. "Daddy?" Nobody moved. Somewhere behind Do-hyun, a phone buzzed, ignored. His head of security, Jang Woo-bin, took one step forward, murmuring, "Sir, we should move you to—" Do-hyun raised a hand, cutting him off without looking away from the child. He crouched down slowly, the way a man approaches something he does not yet understand, something that might disappear if he moves too fast. "I think you've mistaken me for someone else," he said, and his voice, usually a blade, came out uneven. The girl did not answer with words. She unfolded her small fist and held out the photograph, its surface creased from years of small hands. Do-hyun took it, and the moment his eyes landed on the image, something in his chest went cold. It was him, younger, unguarded, laughing even, an expression his own employees had never once witnessed. Beside him stood a woman with dark skin and a bright, unguarded smile, her arm looped through his, her head tilted against his shoulder. "Pearl." "Where did you get this?" he asked, and this time his voice cracked entirely. "Mommy gave it to me," the girl said. "She told me, if something bad happened, find the man in the picture." Do-hyun's throat tightened. "What's your name?" "Maya." The single syllable detonated something inside him that he did not have the language for yet. "Where is your mother, Maya? Where is Pearl?" Maya's small chin began to wobble, the practiced calm of the last few minutes finally cracking. "I can't find Mommy," she whispered, and then the tears came, fast and unstoppable, the kind that had clearly been held back through an ordeal too large for a 4-year-old to carry alone. She said, "Wait by the car." She said, "Wait." I waited. I waited a long time. Then I couldn't find her anymore. Do-hyun turned sharply to Woo-bin. "Pull every camera feed. I want to know how a child walked into this building completely unaccompanied." The search took 11 minutes. 11 minutes in which Do-hyun did not let go of Maya's hand, in which he barely breathed, in which the empire he had spent 4 years building suddenly felt like nothing compared to the small fingers curled into his palm. The footage came back grainy but clear enough. Maya, alone, walking 3 blocks from a residential intersection, crossing 2 streets without an adult in sight, her photograph clutched to her chest the entire way. No stroller, no guardian, no car in frame that matched any registered vehicle. Then Woobin's radio crackled again, and his face changed. "Sir," he said, lowering his voice as if that might soften the blow. "A woman matching the description you gave us has just been brought into Seoul General. Hit and run, unconscious. No ID on her." Do-hyun's hand tightened around Maya's. "Get the car." Before they reached the car, Woobin pulled him aside for one final update, his voice low enough that Maya, still holding tight to Do-hyun's hand, would not hear. "Sir, there's something else. The vehicle that hit her. Traffic cameras caught a partial plate 3 streets over. It's registered to a logistics company that doesn't officially exist. Shell registration, filed 18 months ago, no active business license. Someone built that company just to make this look random," Do-hyun said. "That's my read too. Find out who owns it. Quietly. I don't want this on the news before I understand what I'm walking into." He did not remember much of the ride to the hospital after that. He remembered only Maya's small voice beside him, asking questions he had no answers for. "Is Mommy going to be okay? Why does she look scared of you? Why didn't you come find us?" And the photograph still crumpled in his other hand. Pearl's smile staring back at him from 4 years. He could never get back. The hospital corridor smelled of antiseptic and fear. Do-hyun moved through it like a man wading through water, every step slower than he wanted, every second stretching longer than it should. A nurse blocked the door to the ICU wing. "Sir, I'm sorry. Only immediate family is permitted." "I am immediate family," Do-hyun snapped, then stopped himself because the words tasted like a lie the moment they left his mouth. He had signed the papers 4 years ago. He had erased himself from that title the day he told Pearl to board the flight. "Do you have documentation? A marriage certificate? Any proof of relation?" He had none of it with him. He had none of it, period, not anymore, because the divorce had been finalized in absentia while Pearl was still somewhere over the Pacific, and every legal thread connecting them had been cut by his own signature. "This is my daughter," he said instead, lifting Maya slightly, and something in the desperation of his voice must have registered, because the nurse's expression faltered. "I'll get the attending physician," she said, and disappeared through the doors. Maya refused to sit in the waiting room chairs. She stood at the small window in the door, pressing her palm to the glass, watching the blurred shapes of doctors moving inside. When Do-hyun tried to gently pull her back, she resisted with a strength that startled him. "I want to see Mommy," she said. "You have to let me see Mommy." "I know," he said, kneeling beside her again, feeling the ache of not knowing how to be what she needed. "I know, Maya. We're going to see her. I promise." She turned to him then, her eyes red-rimmed but steady, far too steady for a child her age. "If you're my daddy," she said, "why weren't you with us?" The question landed like a blade between his ribs, and he had no defense for it. He opened his mouth, but nothing came. 4 years of silence did not have an answer that fit into a single sentence for a 4-year-old who had just watched her mother get carried away on a stretcher. "I made a mistake," he finally said, because it was the only true thing he had. A very big one, bigger than I understood at the time. "Mommy said mistakes should be fixed," Maya said, wiping her nose with the back of her hand, her voice small but unwavering. "Are you going to fix it?" "Yes," Do-hyun said, and for the first time since the airport 4 years ago, he meant a promise completely. "I'm going to fix everything I can." Maya considered this with the grave seriousness only a child could summon, then reached over and took his hand again, as though his answer had earned that much trust. No more and no less. It was the smallest gesture, and it undid him more than anything Seo-rin or the falsified documents or the flash drive ever could. Before he could say anything further, two police officers entered the corridor, their expressions grim, and one of them addressed him directly. "Mr. Kang, we need to speak with you about the incident. Is she going to be all right?" "We don't have that information yet, but we do have information about the accident." The officer glanced at his notepad. "Witnesses say the vehicle didn't slow down. It targeted her directly. And a bag she was carrying is missing. We found it near the scene, but it had been gone through. Torn open." Do-hyun's jaw tightened. "Someone wanted something from her." "That's our working theory." The officer handed him an evidence bag containing Pearl's recovered belongings. Not the bag itself, which had been kept for forensics, but the contents that had spilled loose and been gathered by a passerby. A laptop with a cracked corner, a sketchbook filled with handwriting, not sketches, a folder of blueprints, and tucked into an inner pocket, wrapped in a small cloth, an encrypted flash drive. Do-hyun stared at the items as if they belonged to a stranger. In some ways, they did. He did not know this Pearl, the one who carried blueprints and encrypted drives, the one who had built an entire second life across the ocean, raising a daughter alone, running from something or someone with enough resources to try to kill her over a bag. A doctor emerged, mask lowered, exhaustion etched into her face. "She's stable for now. We've got her sedated. You can see her for a few minutes, but she needs rest." Do-hyun did not wait for permission twice. He carried Maya into the room himself. Pearl lay pale against the white sheets, tubes threading from her arm, a bruise blooming dark along her temple. For a moment, watching her chest rise and fall, Do-hyun forgot every ounce of power he held outside these walls. He was simply a man staring at the wreckage of a choice he had made 4 years ago. Then Pearl's eyes fluttered open. For one breathless second, something like relief crossed her face at the sight of him. An old instinct. A memory of safety her body hadn't yet caught up to erasing. But it vanished as quickly as it came, replaced by something sharper. Fear. "Take Maya," she rasped, her hand weakly gripping his sleeve. "Take her and run. Please. Do-hyun, run!" Her eyes rolled back before he could ask why, before he could ask from what, and the machines beside her bed began to beep in urgent rhythm as the sedative pulled her back under. Do-hyun stood frozen, Maya's small hand tightening around his fingers. The words "take her" and "run" echoing louder than anything he had heard in years. He did not sleep that night. He sat in a private room he had commandeered down the hall, Maya finally asleep on a cot beside him, her small chest rising and falling in the same rhythm her mother's had. On the table in front of him sat the evidence bag, the laptop, the sketchbook, the blueprints, and the flash drive. He opened the sketchbook first. It was not filled with drawings. Page after page held handwritten notes, dates, names, transaction records, all of it in Pearl's careful, slanted handwriting. Names of shell companies, references to land parcels along Seoul's eastern corridor. A phrase circled in red ink, again and again. Seo-rin Holdings, falsified permits. His hand stilled on the page. Yoon Seo-rin. The woman who had stood beside him at the airport 4 years ago. The woman his family had all but arranged for him to marry after Pearl was gone. The woman whose empire he had helped expand without ever once questioning where the money came from. He called Woo Bin in immediately. "I need someone who can crack encryption. Tonight. Not tomorrow. Tonight." It took 6 hours. When the drive finally opened on a laptop borrowed from the Kang family's private security division, Do-hyun sat alone in the dim light of the hospital room and began to read. Financial transfers routed through 3 countries before landing in accounts tied to Seo-rin's family conglomerate. Construction permits stamped and approved for land that, according to public zoning records, should never have been cleared. Names of officials who had suddenly retired with unexplained wealth. and buried in a folder labeled simply 2022, a set of documents that made Do-hyun's stomach drop, his own signature, 4 years old, authorizing the termination of his marriage, authorizing a formal request to immigration to review Pearl's visa status, based on documentation he had never personally verified. Documentation his family's lawyers had assured him was airtight. He had signed it in under 2 minutes, in the middle of a business dinner, without reading past the first page, because Seo-rin had leaned over and murmured that it was simply a formality, that the family lawyers had already reviewed everything, that he needn't waste his evening on paperwork when there were investors waiting to be charmed. He remembered the exact glass of wine in his hand when he signed it. He remembered laughing at something Seo-rin said moments later. He had not thought of Pearl again that night, not once, and the horror of that realization sat heavier in his chest than anything the documents themselves contained. Further into the drive, he found records Pearl had gathered from her exile, months spent in a foreign consulate office trying to appeal a ruling no one would explain to her. Years spent quietly rebuilding a design career from nothing while raising Maya alone, and interspersed throughout, dated entries that read less like evidence and more like a private diary she had never intended anyone to read. One entry, dated to Maya's first birthday, said simply, "I will not let her grow up believing love disappears without a reason. Someday I will hand her the truth myself, whatever it costs me to find it." Do-hyun closed the laptop and sat in silence for a long time. He had trusted the wrong person completely, and that trust had cost him 4 years of his daughter's life and nearly cost Pearl hers. The next morning, Do-hyun did something he had not done in over a decade. He went looking for a retired civil servant with no leverage over him, no reason to answer his questions, and no obligation to tell him the truth. Her name was Han Mi-suk. She had worked in immigration processing for 26 years before retiring under circumstances that, according to the internal files Woo-bin dug up overnight, had never been properly explained. Do-hyun found her in a small apartment on the outskirts of the city, her hands trembling slightly as she poured tea for a man she clearly recognized. "I always knew she was innocent," Mi-suk said, before he even asked, setting the photograph of Pearl on the table between them. "That case never made sense to me. The documentation came in already finalized, already stamped. All I did was process paperwork that had been signed off higher up than my desk." "By whom?" Mi-suk hesitated, glancing toward her window as if the walls themselves might be listening. "There was pressure, from a private office, not government, corporate. They said it was a formality, that the family had already agreed to the terms." Her eyes lifted to his. "Your family, Mr. Kang." Do-hyun's chest tightened. "Not my family. One woman using my family's name." Mi-suk nodded slowly. "I lost my position 2 months after processing it. They said budget cuts. I know what I saw in that folder, though. Everything about Pearl's status was falsified before it ever reached me. Forged declarations, a fabricated overstay record. She never broke a single law in this country." Do-hyun sat in silence for a long moment, the weight of the truth settling over him like wet concrete. "I signed her deportation order," he said quietly. "I didn't verify a single piece of it. I trusted the wrong report, from the wrong person, and I let it destroy everything." Mi-suk did not offer him comfort. She simply refilled his cup and said, "Then I hope you plan on fixing it, Mr. Kang. Not just for her. For that little girl I heard is now living under your roof." Word had traveled fast. That afternoon, Do-hyun stood outside Seo-rin's penthouse office, the flash drive's contents printed and organized into a folder tucked under his arm. When he entered, she was seated behind her glass desk, unbothered, sipping coffee as though his arrival had been expected for years. "Do-hyun," she said warmly, "I heard you have a new house guest." "Cut the pleasantries, Seo-rin." She smiled, setting her cup down with deliberate slowness. "You found the files. I assumed you would eventually. Pearl was always more resourceful than either of us gave her credit for. You forged her immigration documents. You erased 4 years of her life. You nearly had her killed. I gave you exactly what you wanted to believe, Seo-rin said, rising from her chair, unhurried, almost amused. You wanted a reason to end things with her before your father cut you out of the company for marrying beneath the family name. I simply provided the reason. You signed it willingly, Do-hyun. Don't rewrite history to make yourself the victim. His hands curled into fists at his sides. I'm exposing everything. The falsified permits, the shell companies, the immigration fraud, all of it. You'll destroy your own family doing it, Seo-rin said, circling the desk now, closing the distance between them slowly, deliberately. Your father built half his fortune on partnerships with my family. Pull one thread, and the whole tapestry unravels. His name, his company, the very headquarters your daughter walked into. Is that really the price you want to pay for a woman who's spent 4 years hating you? She's not the one who should be paying anything, Do-hyun said. She never broke a single law. You built an entire fiction to erase her, and I was too blind, too arrogant, too eager to believe it to ever check. Because it was easier, Seo-rin said softly, almost gently, as if she were doing him a kindness. Because a black foreign designer with no family name was never going to be accepted by your father. And you knew it long before I ever handed you a reason to walk away. I didn't create your cowardice, Do-hyun. I only gave it paperwork. The words landed harder than any threat she could have made, because some small, buried part of him recognized the truth in them. He said nothing for a long moment, and when he finally spoke, his voice had gone quiet and lethal. Maybe you're right. Maybe I wanted an excuse. That doesn't change what you did, or what it's going to cost you now. Seo-rin's smile did not waver, but something colder entered her eyes. If you expose me, you expose the network that's kept half of Seoul's construction contracts moving for a decade. Half of Seoul falls with me, Do-hyun. Your family's name included. Are you prepared for that? I'm prepared for whatever it costs, he said. I already lost the only thing that mattered. There's nothing left for you to threaten me with. Seo-rin's expression flickered, just briefly, before smoothing back into composure. Then I suppose we'll see how far you're willing to fall. That night, Pearl vanished from her hospital room. The monitors had been disconnected. The IV line dangled loose from its stand. A single security camera near the service elevator had gone dark for exactly 4 minutes, long enough for someone to move a sedated woman out of the building unnoticed. Do-hyun received the call at 2 a.m. He was on his feet before Woo-bin finished the sentence. Maya, thankfully, had already been moved earlier that evening to a secured residence, guarded by 2 of Do-hyun's most trusted men, on his own instruction the moment Seo-rin's threats had made the danger clear. It was the first decision he had made purely as a father, without calculating cost or consequence, and it was the decision that kept his daughter safe while chaos closed in around everyone else. Mobilize everyone, Do-hyun said, his voice flat and lethal in a way his men had not heard in years. Every asset, every contact. I want every warehouse, every shell address tied to Seo-rin's network searched within the hour. Sir, if we move against her directly, it could start a war between the families. This isn't about power, Do-hyun cut in. This was never about power. It's about getting her back. The search stretched through the night, through abandoned construction sites and half-finished tower blocks that existed only on paper, funded by companies with no employees and no purpose beyond laundering money. Every location came back empty. Every lead dissolved into another shell address, another dead end, another hour lost. By the 4th site, Woo-bin's voice had lost its earlier caution and turned openly worried. Sir, we're running out of coordinates. If she's not at one of the remaining locations, then we keep looking, Do-hyun said. We don't stop because the list is short. It was in the 6th location, a gutted building on the eastern corridor, exactly matching a set of coordinates buried in Pearl's own documents, that they found her. She was conscious, restrained to a metal chair, furious rather than afraid, glaring at the two men guarding her with a defiance that told Do-hyun everything he needed to know about the woman who had survived 4 years alone, raising a daughter, gathering evidence against people far more powerful than herself. When she saw him step through the doorway, her expression did not soften into relief the way he half expected. It hardened. You shouldn't have come, she said, her voice hoarse but sharp. If they see you here, they'll use it against you, against Maya. They already used everything they had, Do-hyun said, crossing the room and cutting the restraints himself. There's nothing left for them to threaten me with that I haven't already lost once. The rescue was fast, clean, and quiet. No shots fired. No headlines the following morning about a mafia war in the streets of Seoul. Just Pearl, exhausted but alive, wrapped in a blanket in the back of Do-hyun's car, staring at him with an expression he could not read. You came, she said finally. I should have come 4 years ago. She looked away, out the window, and said nothing more for the rest of the ride. The digital evidence Pearl had spent 4 years compiling reached the prosecutor's office within days, delivered not through leverage or intimidation, but through legitimate legal channels that Do-hyun insisted on using, even when his own lawyers warned him it would implicate members of his own extended family, who had looked the other way for years. Seorin was arrested at her office, led out in handcuffs past the same glass desk where she had once smiled at Do-hyun with total confidence that her power made her untouchable. The falsified permits, the immigration fraud, the years of financial manipulation, it all surfaced publicly, methodically, undeniably. Justice, this time, did not come from mafia retaliation or backroom deals. It came from evidence, from truth, from a woman who had refused to stop fighting even when the entire system had been built to silence her. Weeks passed before Pearl was strong enough to leave the hospital. Do-hyun visited daily, though he never stayed longer than Pearl's silence allowed, never pushed past the careful distance she maintained between them. He brought no flowers. He rehearsed no speeches. On the day she was discharged, he arrived instead with a folder of legal documents. What is this? Pearl asked, eyeing it warily as she sat by the window of her small rented apartment, Maya curled up asleep on the couch nearby after a long afternoon of finally, cautiously, letting her father read her a story. Your citizenship has been restored, Do-hyun said quietly, setting the folder on the table between them. Fully reinstated, backdated, no gaps in your record. Your company, the design firm you were building before everything happened. Every asset that was frozen or seized has been returned. Every account, every patent under your name, it's all yours again. Pearl flipped through the pages slowly, her expression unreadable. You did all this. I owed you all this, he said. It doesn't erase what I did. Pearl closed the folder and looked up at him, her eyes steady, tired, but no longer afraid. No, she said, it doesn't. The silence that followed stretched long enough that Do-hyun almost stood to leave, certain he had overstepped, certain this was as far as forgiveness would ever travel. But before he reached the door, he turned back. Can I see Maya? He asked. Not, can we be a family again? Not, can you forgive me? Just the one question that mattered most, stripped of every expectation he had no right to hold. Pearl studied him for a long moment. She likes pancakes on Saturdays, she finally said. If you're serious about this, you'll remember that. It was not forgiveness. It was an opening, and Do-hyun took it without hesitation. The months that followed were quiet in a way his life had never been. He learned Maya's school schedule by heart. He attended every recital, every parent-teacher conference, sitting in the back row without ever demanding a seat closer to Pearl. He never once asked her to consider reconciliation. He never pressured a single conversation past where she allowed it to go. He simply became a father, one ordinary Saturday at a time, one pancake breakfast at a time, one bedtime story at a time. There were hard days, days when Pearl's guard rose sharply after some small reminder of the years she had lost. Days when Maya asked pointed, painful questions that had no easy answers. Days when the business world Do-hyun still had to navigate, threatened to pull him back into the version of himself capable of signing away a family without reading past the first page. One such day came 3 months in, when Do-hyun arrived to pick Maya up for their usual Saturday and found Pearl standing rigid in the doorway, a newspaper clipping in her hand. An article about the Kang family's continued business dealings with a subsidiary once linked, however loosely, to Seo-rin's dismantled network. "You said all of it," Pearl said, her voice tight. "You said you'd cut every tie." "I did," Do-hyun said. "This subsidiary was flagged for review 2 days ago. I've already begun severing the contract, Pearl. I should have told you before you saw it in a headline." She studied him for a long moment, searching his face the way she used to when they were still strangers learning to trust one another for the first time, years before either of them had a reason not to. Whatever she found, there was enough. She stepped aside and let him in. "I need you to understand something," she said quietly before Maya came bounding down the hall. "I'm not doing this for you. I'm doing it because she deserves a father who shows up. The day you stop showing up is the day this ends. All of it. Not just Saturdays." "I understand," Do-hyun said. "I'm not asking you to trust me yet. I'm only asking you to watch." Pearl said nothing to that. But she did not close the door on him either. And in the months that followed, that silence became its own kind of permission. He did not go back to the man who signed papers without reading them. Every time the temptation to retreat into cold efficiency rose in him, in boardrooms where old habits whispered that speed mattered more than certainty. He thought of Maya's small hand in his that first day at headquarters, of Pearl's voice rasping, "Take her," and run, of the years he could never recover, but the years still ahead of him that he refused to waste. He read every document twice now. He questioned every convenient story handed to him by people eager for his trust. It was slower. It cost him deals, occasionally. It cost him nothing that mattered. Maya grew loud and fearless in ways that reminded him constantly of the woman who had raised her alone. She argued with him about vegetables. She insisted on choosing her own school bag, despite his assistant's attempts to buy her the most expensive one available. She asked, one evening over pancakes she had helped burn slightly at the edges, whether he still worked for the scary building. And when he laughed and said yes, she declared she would run it better one day. And he believed her completely. 1 year after Maya had walked alone into the headquarters of Korea's most feared Mafia family, clutching a single faded photograph, she stood on a small stage at her school's spring performance, dressed as a sunflower in a costume Pearl had sewn herself, scanning the crowd for one particular face. She found him in the 3rd row, exactly where he always sat. The moment the performance ended, she did not wait for the formal dismissal. She ran, weaving between chairs and parents, straight toward him, and without a single second of hesitation, she threw herself into his arms. "Dad!" He caught her without effort, lifting her the way he had learned to over the past year, laughing. A real laugh. The same one frozen in the photograph Maya had carried into his life, and held her against his chest, as though he might never set her down again. Across the room, Pearl watched from beside the exit, her arms crossed loosely, her expression softer than it had been in 4 years. She had not forgiven him. Not entirely. Some wounds did not close simply because the man who caused them finally showed up. But watching Maya laugh in her father's arms, watching the steadiness in Do-hyun's eyes, that had replaced the coldness she remembered from the airport all those years ago. Something in her chest loosened just slightly. She smiled, not because she had forgiven him, because he had finally become the man their daughter deserved. If this story moved you, don't scroll away just yet. Hit that subscribe button so you never miss the next one. Drop a comment below telling us which moment hit you hardest, and give this video a like if you believe redemption should always be earned, never simply given. Sometimes love deserves a second chance. Trust never does. Trust must be rebuilt. One quiet Saturday morning at a time.